Welcome to Green Dot Daily, live every weekday at 3 Eastern on the Action app and YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel. I'm Maria Marino, and coming up on the show, how to bet the rest of the Stanley Cup Final, including tonight's Game 2 with Tim Kalinowski and Nick Martin, plus MLB picks with Billy Ward, and Michael Calabrese stops by with a college football future. But we start in the NBA. And so far, the finals got Luka Doncic singing Celine Dion. He scored 62 points in games 1 and 2. The rest of the team has won 25. He had 11 assists alone last night, 12 total so far, while the rest of his team has just 18. He's shooting a respectable 51% from the floor and 38% from three, but his teammates can't exactly say the same. Action Network senior writer Matt Moore is with us now. And I think for most of the Mavericks team, you could attribute some of this to inexperience, but Kyrie Irving was supposed to be, the Robin to Luka's Batman, and Kyrie just hasn't been very effective so far. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, look, some of this is he is just missing shots, because it's hard to be like, is he finding the right shots? Because it's not like Kyrie ever has like great shot selection to begin with. It's not like he hunts out awesome looks. He's a tough shot maker. That's his entire thing. But he's not able to get to the rim because they're bringing great help on him. You saw that block there by Derek White. He's gotten blocked more in this series than I can remember him almost ever being blocked in a series. Al Horford's gotten him. Noted hyper athletic, jump out the gym guy Al Horford has blocked him several times, as well as Porzingis. Derek White's gotten him a couple of times. And then when he's tried to get into his ISO stuff, he just doesn't have the rhythm. They're bothering him. Peyton Pritchard has actually defended him capably. That's a big warning sign. I wonder how much of this is just Boston and the problems that he has in that building after all of the history there, and whether that's just somehow got him a little off kilter, and if he settles down in game 2. Now, I don't think that him settling down is necessarily like, aha, the Mavericks have them now, because there's a lot that Boston can play better at too. But I do think mostly that I think that Kyrie's going to have better games as the series goes on. The problem is probably they could have won game 2 with how Boston played if they got a better Kyrie, and that was a huge missed opportunity.
Okay, can I pose a question to you? As great as Luka has played, at least offensively, this might sound weird, but I could tell pretty much as soon as the game was going on in the first half, like, this isn't sustainable what Luka is doing. And they weren't playing as a team. And I think Kyrie at times has deferred to Luka. Like, Kyrie needs to be able to get touches and get established and get into a rhythm as well. Like, do they need to have Luka share a little bit more or do something different? I mean, I know he had all those assists, but I'm like, there's got to be a different approach here.
This is the problem, is that Dallas got here. They made the NBA Finals by playing this way. Luka, if they were to win, Luka would have the highest usage this season for any player in NBA history to win a championship. It's hard to win like this, and it's worked, and it's gotten them here, and you don't want to abandon that. But this is one of the problems, is that when you play this kind of ball dominant style, dribble, 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 shoot or pass, it's very hard to change that. You can't just adopt on the fly. They don't have other mechanisms. They don't have other things built in. They kind of messed with that earlier this season, and that's one of the reasons why the Mavericks looked a little bit more balanced. But as the playoffs have gone on, they've really leaned into it, and Boston's switching style makes you go into it. Teams, it's very hard to do the things that break switching defenses that aren't just, I'm going to isolate and score so well, it forces you to help. And we saw this in the second half where Luka has just worn out. He's exhausted. They're going at him every time on defense, and he's having to do everything himself, all by himself. There are mechanisms, but they don't play into Luka's strengths or how he wants to play. It's getting him off ball. It's running more complex action. It's using him as a screener. They don't want to do that. He doesn't want to do that. And unless they're able to get completely away from their identity, the playoffs are all about problem solving. The Mavs only have one solution on offense. And right now, against this team, that's not working. So unless they get great shot variance, there's not a lot of answers, I think, for Dallas going forward.
All by myself. Okay, we can move on now.
Very nice.
So you're welcome. Let's talk about the Boston side of things. Okay. And specifically Jason Tatum. This is somewhat of a quandary because Boston, they're winning games. Jason Tatum doesn't look like, I don't know if it's even fair to say doesn't look like himself. I actually think he's played quite well. He's filling up the box score. He's doing a lot of things to impact the team. He's just not scoring. What do you make of what's going on with him?
So they're still in game 2, and I keep waiting for the Mavericks to counterbalance this and live a little bit more with Jason. It's weird that the Mavericks are watching the Celtics literally be like, no, go ahead, Luka, do whatever you want. We don't care. We're just going to shut down the other guys. And the Mavericks are like, we must shut down Jason Tatum, the head of the snake. Send 4 defenders at him. And I'm like, look at what they're doing to you. But instead, like, you look at it in game 2, I've posted these clips on Twitter. They're still sending 3-4 defenders at him, and he's making the right reads and making them pay. Now, on the other end, Tatum is not as good as Luka at making reads. So there are times when he's throwing up shots and he's not able to finish at the rim. He's missing these layups off front iron, trying to go too fast to get ahead of the defense. You're not going to do that in these help situations. His 3-pointer hasn't been there. That's mostly shot variance, but it hasn't been there for the duration. A question for me is, does Tatum lean into, hey, all right, I'm just going to focus on playmaking because that's working. You take the shots if they're there, but don't try and force it as much, because if he does that, they're going to be even better with him on the floor. I will say that the start severely limits, I think, his chances of winning Finals MVP. Everyone can kind of be like, hey, Jason Tatum did what they needed from him to win, and still not think that he's been Finals MVP because he has shot absolutely so horrifically. Voters are going to remember that Brown and Porzingis, they won 1 and 2. So Tatum's still the number 1 in the market. He's still the favorite. That to me is wild. He should not be the favorite in the Finals MVP market at this point.
I mean, I totally agree. You can't look at him definitively as being the reason that they won either game 1 or game 2, even though I think he has played quite well and done a lot of good things. It is debatable, though, at this point. So that brings me to, who is your Finals MVP right now? I know it's still a young series, but where do you look?
So the first one for me is Jaylen Brown plus 190, and this is easy because I had him in pre-playoffs, and I had him before this series. That was my best bet, was Jaylen Brown Finals MVP. I still think there's good value on him at plus 190. There's a spot in the market for that. There was an ESPN poll, just like Bob Myers being like, who do you think's Finals MVP? And he said Brad Stevens. Well, guess what? You're not going to vote for Brad Stevens. Two of the other panelists said Jaylen Brown. One said Drew Holiday. Drew is less likely to keep up what he did in game 2, just especially on the road. It's just unlikely. Whereas Jaylen's getting to the rim the most. He's attacking. He had assists last night. The defensive plays really stand out. He's guarding Luka most of the time. Luka's cooking him, but the overall, just taking that job is going to give him, I think, some credit. He leads in scoring, and to me, he leads in signature plays with these big dunks, the big steals, the big block in game 1. Voters remember stuff like that. They remembered it in the Eastern Conference Finals. I think they'll remember it here. I love Jaylen Brown plus 190. I think Drew Holiday's been terrific, but there are some small things that Dallas can do to shut off the water. So I think they'll switch up some of those things and be like, look, we can't let Drew Holiday just absolutely cook us. And some of that's just, hey, we can't defend him with Luka Doncic. He cannot be guarding Drew Holiday. They're running out of spots to hide Luka defensively. If you want the long shot, it's Kristaps Porzingis if he plays. Banged up in game 2. A lot of questions about his availability. He's 50-1 right now. Brandon Anderson got him, I think, at 60-1. There was a 50-1 before the series as well. Now I think is a really good spot to get KP, because if Jaylen Brown doesn't take it, let's say that Brown and Tatum kind of even out over these next 2 to 3 games, however long the series goes. If they even out, Boston wins, but Porzingis continues to be this huge impact player. If you think he plays in game 2, and game 3, then there's probably a real opportunity here for Kristaps Porzingis to win Finals MVP. He may not have his best games behind him. He might have better games in front of him, despite the injury.
Well, I mean, I think once we saw what he looked like in game 1 and how effective he was, it was like, okay, he could really be the deciding factor in the series. But now this potential injury sort of changes everything. Do you have any other, information to indicate one way or another, what's going to happen with him?
Yeah, so it's tough. It's a re-aggravation of an existing injury. If he had just banged up his hip, I would worry about it less. If he banged up his shoulder, I would worry about it less. It's a pre-existing injury though, where he did tweak the calf, and he has kind of tailed off in these last 2 games. So you can tell that the calf is kind of wearing on him as these games go. He had both calves wrapped really heavily before the start of the second half. That was a big deal that I noticed, was how much wrap was on both calves, because they're trying to get him to not overcompensate on the other because of the injury to the one. Mazzulla said after the game he's good to go. He was just flat out no, he's fine, he's good to go. KP was equally, not equally, he was almost as optimistic. He was like, I'm going to do everything I can to play. It should be okay. But he also was like, we're going to do imaging. That was a worry to me. Okay, as we talk here on Monday afternoon, later Monday afternoon, that report will come in on the imaging. And once you get, like, you should not be betting into this market until you know where KP is, because unless you think that the market is going to underestimate or overestimate his value if he's out in the direction you already lean, like, that to me is like how you need to read this. I would advise just waiting, see what the injury report says and where the market moves to, and then based on it, make your decision to bet on it based off of those factors.
All right. Game 3, prediction and or pick. What do you think at this point?
So last night on Buckets Live, you can catch that after every finals game on youtube.com/theactionnetwork. I predicted we were doing, like, let's guess the line for game 3 before it comes out. And I said Mavs -1.5, and I was dead on the money here. And the reason was because I've talked to bookmakers, and I know that most of this was about power rating for the two teams and how they upgraded, downgraded. And I didn't think they would adjust much off of the first 2 games, despite everything that Boston's shown. And so now Mavs are -1.5. This is still incredibly short on Boston, in my opinion. Boston, this is the first game in the playoffs that Boston's going to be a dog. First game. They have not been a dog these entire playoffs. How about this? This is going to be the first time since 2003, when we have data, that a seed lower than 4th is going to be favored in an NBA Finals game. Hasn't ever happened. When we go back to even seeds lower than 3rd, it's only happened 6 times out of 30 games. It just doesn't happen for this team to be favored. How about this one? In the game in March, where Boston, after the trades for Dallas that made them into this new team, when Boston was on the road in Dallas, Boston was a 2.5-point favorite. So you're saying that from that game where they stomped Dallas, through the playoffs, through 2 games where they've again beaten Dallas, now the line should move 4 points.
Yeah.
I can't get there. It's Boston or nothing for me. Our Buckets crew, I will say, loves Mavs first half. The historical trends say that you're going to hear that a lot this week leading into game 2 from the various NBA analysts, that the smash spot is that team down 0-2 in the first half. I want Boston, depending on where the number is. I'm going to wait for KP. If KP plays, I'm on Celtics money line. If he doesn't play, I'll have to think about it. I will still probably lean Celtics in the points and probably on the money line as well in game 3. I can't find ways outside of just shot variance for Dallas to be able to overcome what Boston is bringing to the table.
Sounds good, Matt. Well, we will talk more about this Tuesday at 5 Eastern on Nothing But Bet. By that time, we should have more info on Porzingis, but thanks for joining us on GDD.
Thanks for having me.
To the NHL, and Sergei Bobrovsky put the Panthers on his back in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final. He allowed 0 goals and made 32 saves, despite facing 18 high-danger scoring chances. His .366 goals saved above expectation is the highest for any goalie this postseason, and he's now the favorite to win the Conn Smythe at +220 after opening at +2,500. As we bring in Tim Kalinowski and Nick Martin. So Bob's great performance may have overshadowed the fact that the Oilers outshot the Panthers 32-18. What does that tell you, Tim, about the rest of the series?
I think it makes it really difficult, right? We have a sample size of 1 here, and I'm going to draw the comparison to the Panthers in their previous series against the Rangers. They really outplayed the Rangers in game 3, but they lost. And then so going into game 4, we're saying to ourselves, well, what do we do with this? Because we just saw a team tilt the ice for 60 plus minutes. And, you know, do we go back to the well here? And they were going to be favorites in that game. So I think we look at this and say to ourselves, well, the Oilers are still they're still underdogs in game 2 here. And I just have to use what we've seen and say the Oilers, I don't think they're going to go 0-for-3 on the power play again. I don't think that they're going to be fine Bobrovsky unsolvable with this offense. So when I look at the betting market, I see McDavid at +320 to win the Conn Smythe. I would still take that. If you haven't bet it already, I would bet it. And maybe if you have, I would take it again, because as you're going to get on here, we're going to be leaning towards the Oilers here, certainly liking them. And if you like that, then you probably like McDavid to win the Conn Smythe. There's still a chance he could win it even if they lose. And then on top of that, Leon Draisaitl, the other superstar there, I would like him to lead the series in goals. Still, I bet it before the series at +600. It's still +600. We saw 3 goal scorers in game 1, 3 different players. So not really a lot of, headway to catch up to there. He's just got to put 1 in and he's tied. And like I said, Oilers power play, he's going to play plenty of minutes too with the days off between games. So that is how I would lean into betting this.
And it certainly sounds like you can make a strong case for backing the Oilers tonight, given that they controlled much of the first game. Nick, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I like the Oilers. I'm not surprised to see them steaming as we speak. This, and I mean, we even went up to plus 125 for a bit on Saturday night. Now it's back down to plus 110 most places. I would stop right there. But I think that the number one thing, first off, the Oilers were arguably power rated right with the Panthers. There were some modelers and some analysts who thought that it was a little unfair that they were this big of a dog entering the series. I wasn't necessarily one of them. I thought it was pretty fair, but it's more than just the game one performance. I think that you're crediting with Edmonton. They've beaten 3 good teams to get here as well, and they've had a really convincing playoff run. So yeah, they completely dominated Florida in game one. It's kind of funny to me seeing some of these pro Florida takes talking about, okay, well, Florida won the game. You just have to base it off who won the game. I'd like to find the takes from those people in the Rangers series when Shesterkin did the exact same thing to the Panthers. I think that's basically what it was. I mean, the quality was there. It wasn't just like we're just sitting here talking about all this possession or shots on goal. There was 18 high danger chances tracked. I'd say the eye test agreed with that. There was 4 breakaways, ton of good chances for Nugent Hopkins, Bouchard, McDavid, Draisaitl. Those guys aren't going to miss a lot. If there's one thing I think you could say the Panthers did reasonably well defensively, I guess it would be pressuring the Oilers enough that on a lot of the shots they couldn't get the puck up. But I still just think there's a lot of questions to ask of Florida here. Yes, they're going to be better defensively, but to me, I can't see how you're not siding with the Oilers given the number. And it's a bit of an annoying one because I think it's a really contended take. Like it feels like a lot of people are on the Panthers. And the thing is, I don't think the point's not that the Oilers are going to be more likely to win this game. The point is that their number is just too long. I think it's way closer to a coin flip. So I'm not trying to say that the Oilers should be favored just because of how they played in game one, but I think anything comparable to that, and they're going to have a good offensive night. And then the other thing I think they'll like is that it was the Darnell Nurse and Cody Ceci pairing that got exposed on both Oilers goals. And it was no surprise to see that Chris Knoblauch, based off his morning skate, is going to pull Ceci out of the lineup, put Desharnais in, make that the third pairing with Darnell Nurse. So I think that move makes a ton of sense. It's actually a pair. They've taken the Nurse Ceci pairing apart this postseason, but they haven't taken Ceci out of the lineup. And I've thought this has been the most logical thing that they could do all playoff long. Even though Nurse has been bad, I still think Ceci's been worse. So I think this is the best Oilers lineup, which also helps given that there are the 2 goals they allowed in game. I mean, aside from the empty netter in game one, were really just directly that pairing. So I think there's a lot to like about the Oilers here. You know, the Panthers are going to be sharper. I expect that they're going to have adjustments. Maybe some of how that game went was the long layoff, but at the same time, Edmonton's generated as many chances as anyone has this season. And it really looked like they were just generating the way that they typically do versus the Panthers in game one. So I think you got to lean with the Oilers finding a way in this one. And then the other note I'll throw out there again, there's still going to be some home ice baked into this line. Whether the Oilers win this game or not, no matter how the game goes, I bet when we go back to Edmonton, the Oilers will probably be like minus 120. So at the end of the day, I think another part of the handicap is what the price would probably be without home ice, and home ice continues to mean absolutely nothing. So I think this is the correct time to take a shot with the Oilers.
What a summation. I think you make a really interesting point comparing Bob and the Panthers to Shesterkin and the Rangers. But if the clear value is on Edmonton, Tim, does that mean this is the night to bet on your guy Draisaitl?
I certainly hope so. I did bet on him in game one as well. And I actually would rather see no goals, you know, when you bet on anytime goal scorer and you don't say to yourself, oh, I picked the wrong guy. They just got flat out shut out. So I'm going to go back to it. It's plus 185. Draisaitl anytime goal scorer in game two. Look, I think there's a lot to be said with the fact that we've had so many days in between games here, and throughout the series we're going to see the same thing. That bodes well for the Oilers Stars. They already want to play them half the game, and now they can really empty the tank here with that luxury. Draisaitl has got 10 goals in this playoffs. He only trails his teammate Hyman for the lead. Hyman has 14. Draisaitl had 4 shots in game one. He was all over it. 23 minutes played. And again, I expect the Oilers, there's no chance they're getting shut out on the power play in this series. They were really good on the power play. They just couldn't bury it. 5 high danger chances. And again, eye test saw that as well. So yeah, I like a little sprinkle on Draisaitl anytime goal, which, goes along well with Nick's pick as well if we're on the Oilers here.
Yeah, it's like the only thing the Oilers couldn't do in game 1 was actually put the puck in the net. Hopefully that changes tonight. Tim, Nick, thank you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Maria.
Thanks, Maria.
Over to MLB, here's a market report for a couple of today's games. Yankees in Kansas City and the White Sox in Seattle with lopsided money on both of the favorites. Yanks at -130, garnering 91% of the handle and 98% of the handle on the Mariners at -214. Majority of money on the over in each of these games as well. As we welcome our junior predictive analyst, Billy Ward, back to the show, specializing, of course, in whether or not a run will be scored in the first inning. So let's start with this Yankees-Royals matchup, and you like a YRFI here.
I do, with a caveat here. This is a pretty tricky one. So much of the reason we like the Yankees YRFIs is because the 2 best hitters in baseball bat within their first 3. We don't know if that's the case today. Last I heard on Juan Soto, he's expected back at some point this series. Could be today, could be as late as Wednesday. And of course, expected back doesn't even mean he makes it. So the way my model has it now, if you project Juan Soto in, this is a massive value at -105 on this YRFI, right? You're getting Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, top of the Royals order is pretty good too. Both pitchers probably due for some negative regression. Everything's lining up right. Without Juan Soto, I have this right around the current line where the best is -105. So I played it just basically thinking we get kind of a free roll if Juan Soto's in terms of expected value. You could also wait and see if we get confirmed lineups. My guess would be if Soto is confirmed in, all that money coming in on the over is going to push it even higher, the game over, which will then make the YRFI a worse price. And then you kind of have to judge whether it's still worth it. With Soto in, I'd take it down to about -120 for anyone who wants to wait. At the line it's at now, -110 would be a pretty hard cutoff, and I really don't like going past the -105. So couple options here. If you think you can be right on the news and beat the market to it and get that YRFI before the market reacts, that's probably the best way to play it. But we never know exactly when lineups are going to come out in baseball. It's not like the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I like how you laid out the different options and what you would do in either scenario, but the way you bet it, like even if Soto doesn't play, it's not like it's overpriced in that situation. It's still like kind of right on the money where it should be. All right, let's talk about the other game that you're focusing on, which is the White Sox and Mariners. This one, you're going NRFI.
I am. And I mean, the 7-run total on the screen is a big reason why we see that. The White Sox are just horrible. They're the worst offense in baseball against righties. They're taking on Logan Gilbert, who's a good one too. It's not just, average level pitcher. Anytime we only really are worried about one team, the NRFI is probably going to be the sharper bet. With that said, it's super juicy. I think the best now is -148 or something. It was a little bit better this morning. That makes it tough. I'm kind of okay if you've got some other bets you like, some other longer odds, using this as a parlay piece just because it is a fairly safe option. With all that said, I have the fair value close to -170 here. So still, even at -150, you're getting some value on it, but I understand people don't want to lay that kind of juice on something that's extremely highly variable like a YRFI or NRFI.
Well, I mean, there's a reason that 98% of money is on Seattle here, but I like, again, just your model showing the value. It's not a crazy amount of juice. Mm-hmm. But Billy Ward, thank you so much for breaking it down for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, look at this. Someone in our Action Network family is an author. It's Michael Calabrese. His first book is called Legendary Bowl, Deciding College Football's Greatest of All Time, and it's launching Monday night at 8 Eastern. All right, Michael Calabrese, congratulations. You have written a book. I mean, that is a tremendous undertaking. It's got to feel good. Tell us what the premise of the book is.
So essentially, this debate has gone on for generations in all sports, but college football in particular. Different regions, different conferences, certainly on a program level, all the alumni, they love to argue, my team was the best. This version of LSU or Nebraska or USC this year, this was the best of all time. And eventually, you can only have so many of those arguments before you get to an impasse. And they never played on the field. They don't have common opponents. Maybe they played in a different era. There's all these hurdles. But what was always there for me as someone who loves college football, it was the NCAA 14 video game series. So that was the last year of it. And once it got sunset, I thought to myself, as kind of a pet project, instead of updating the rosters to the current year, why don't I put in every school's best team in program history? And once I got to about 20, 30 teams, now I can put them into a bracket. And when I expanded that out to 68, and I put it out on Twitter back during the COVID year when we lost sports, and basically it went viral overnight. And what I decided was, all right, let me go back through it and make it as detailed as I possibly can. So when I went through each of these 68 teams, it took between 5 and 10 hours to match the real life roster to the video game, get the simulation just right, calibrate it so that their offense looked the way that their offense really did. Their play calling matched it, their aggressiveness or conservatism, depending on the head coach. Everything was as identical as I could make it. Then I plugged it in, simulated it, and I just sat there kind of like a reporter looking at the stats, watching the game as it, flowed through, providing that narrative to the readers. So about a quarter of the book is a history lesson on what made all of these teams special. And then the rest of it, you get to go on this journey. 68 teams, 67 games, March Madness style bracket. And by the end, we have one champion who can finally point to themselves as the greatest of all time.
Talk about settling a debate, like definitively. And, whenever we have these GOAT arguments, there's usually a generational divide. There are people that argue more for the modern players or teams. And then there are people that are like, hey, but don't forget about years and years ago, this other great team. What can you say about that based on your research?
What was fun about the research is beyond finding the rosters and the depth chart and looking through the stats, I went through old newspaper clippings. I wanted to make sure I had a feel for how the media was covering them at the time. And then I went back and I watched as many games out as they were housed in the YouTube libraries. And in a lot of cases, many of them were available. So when I put 1984 Boston College in this book, I'm not just watching the highlight of Flutie throwing the Hail Mary to beat Miami. I watched 7 of their 12 games that year. So I got a feel for it. Their offense was actually kind of modern. They were happy to let him work outside the pocket and throw it 35, 40 times a game and get into these shootouts. And defensively, they were a bend but don't break defense that prided themselves on turnovers. So watching that, they looked a lot more similar to modern teams than people might imagine. And then on a single player by player basis, in a lot of cases, these athletes were not only good for college football at their time, but they were historically good in terms of Olympic caliber. You look at 82 SMU, the Pony Express, Eric Dickerson, their offense was highly regarded and they ran kind of a triple option offense at times. But defensively, they had an all-pro on their defensive line who won a silver at the 84 Olympics in the shot put. So when people say, oh, these guys aren't as big and strong and fast, I will absolutely push back because the very elite teams that I selected from the 80s and 90s, they had so many great athletes. One more little nugget, the 2001 Miami Hurricanes, who people love to point to as one of the greatest of all time. 6 of their players in that team actually won championships in track and field. You had guys running the 100, 200. You had Ed Reed throwing the javelin, Vince Wilfork throwing the shot put. So these guys were well-rounded athletes. It's not just the last 5 to 10 years that all of a sudden these Frankenstein athletes started popping up that were big and strong and fast all over the field.
Fascinating. Can't wait to find out more nuggets that are going to be in this book, no doubt. Congratulations again. But listen, while you're here, you got to give us something actionable. And it's not too soon, in my opinion, to start looking at some college football futures. So what's a bet that you like?
All right. I just mentioned the Ponies. SMU has not been a national brand for many, many years, but they are back. They're in a power conference once again. It used to be the old Southwest Conference. Now they are in the ACC. They're in a Power 4 conference. Their win total is set at 7.5. And I'll say this. Last year, if their quarterback, Preston Stone, had not been injured, it would likely have been them in the Fiesta Bowl against Oregon instead of Liberty. But instead, he gets banged up. They lose in the AAC title game, and they go to the Fenway Bowl. And for that reason, I think they're flying under the radar because in the NIL transfer portal era, where roster continuity is all over the place, they are one of the few teams in the entire country that bring back the 5 most important people in their program. Their head coach, their starting quarterback, both coordinators, and their strength and conditioning coach. And that kind of continuity, I really believe, has a top-down effect. And for that reason, when you pair it with the second easiest Power 4 schedule in the entire country, they're playing a lot of tin cans this year. Their non-conference schedule is non-existent, and they only face off against one top 25 offense, at least by preseason standards, this season in Florida State. So I think they're going to be favored in a lot of games. I have them going 9-3. They're sitting at 7.5 for their win total with a juice -175 to the over. I don't mind laying the juice. I'll go with the Ponies to have a big season there in Dallas.
Very good. Thank you for that. One more thing I have to ask of you before you go, because the news is out. Danny Hurley reportedly will be staying at UConn and not accepting the Los Angeles Lakers head coaching job. What's your reaction and what's your overall early outlook on the UConn Huskies this year?
Well, step one, huge win for the college game. The narrative in college football and college basketball the last 2 years really has been none of these coaches want to deal with the transfer portal. NIL is giving too much power to outside forces like boosters. They just all want to sprint away and take jobs at the professional ranks. He just turned down generational money from one of the sports franchises in the entire world that has the most mystique possible. Being able to turn around the Lakers would be something that could take him from a college basketball legend to just a basketball legend in general. Yet he turns it down. I think a big reason for that is in the NBA, when you're the cook, you don't get to buy the groceries. You are dependent on all of the superstars. You're in ego management. In Storrs, Connecticut, Dan Hurley may as well be God, and he gets a big say in who comes to play for him. You look at what he's done in the transfer portal this year, bringing in Aiden Mahaney, who was one of the best 18-year-olds in the entire world when he basically was playing at St. Mary's, has a bit of a sophomore slump. If he can unlock his talent in the same way he did with Spencer at UConn, I think there's a chance they're going to make another deep run. And the narrative is wonderful for college sports because is there a program with a bigger target on their back? I would argue that there is not. Having won 2 straight national championships, the whole world's going to look a little bit different if UConn has an early exit in March Madness as opposed to a three-peat where they go just coast to coast, basically unchallenged. So I'm really excited for the college game. And I think what's interesting is that it's clear that Hurley has unfinished business. I don't think the NBA is totally off the table for the foreseeable future for him. I think this will be an annual beating of the drum. Is he going to leave? But at least for one more year, we get the best program with the best coach back at the top of the sport.
I know. I'm so happy about it. And I think, too, you have to remember, even before the transfer portal and what we consider to be the current state of college athletics, remember, Coach Mike Krzyzewski turned down this job in 2004, 20 years ago. Also, Coach Danny Hurley, he's already cracked this code of the current state of college athletics. He's succeeded in the transfer portal era. So this is just a win-win for him. And I don't think the NBA is off the table later on in his career. Mike Calabrese, thanks so much for all the insight as per usual.
Thanks for having me, Maria.
Remember, any picks we give out here on the show, you can easily reference by following Green Dot Daily in the Action app. We keep track so you don't have to. That's going to do it for Green Dot Daily. I'm Maria Marino. Thanks so much for hanging with me. And the show is back tomorrow at 3 Eastern on the Action app and YouTube channel.